Welcome to Less Than 12 Parsecs, the fastest Star Wars podcast in the galaxy. Now here's your host, Tim McMahon.
Now playing at a motion picture theater near you.
Hey, it's Tim. During the lead up to Rogue One, on this show, I contemplated the big job that Lucasfilm's marketing department had in front of them. They had to get across to the common man, the average Joe on the street who loves Star Wars, but who doesn't listen to podcasts like this one, what Rogue was and what it wasn't. That this is a new Star Wars movie, but that it's separate from all the other Star Wars movies, and that it wasn't Episode 8. My feelings on this topic were less than enthusiastic, you could say. Maybe even borderline critical. I was worried that it was too big of a job, and I wasn't confident they would be able to pull it off. Would people walk away from the theater asking, hey, where were Rey and Finn? Well, the film's been out for 3 weeks now. So, how did they do? Well, it's been the #1 movie each week, and it's already the second biggest film of the year, and I expect it will be #1 when everything's all said and done. Sure, it didn't pull in the Force Awakens type numbers, but heck, even Episode 7 wasn't supposed to be as big as it was. But dollars really don't answer my questions. And honestly, I don't have the answer to these questions. I don't have the market research data on this subject to dive into. I'm not an industry analyst, but I do have 2 stories. The first is one that I read online. A Facebook friend posted it, shared it. I don't know if it happened to them, but someone, like us, a Star Wars fan, was talking to someone else who wasn't quite as hardcore a Star Wars fan. The non-hardcore person said they were confused because they thought Darth Vader was dead. Ugh. Alright, there you go, story number 1. The second story is one that happened to me today. A coworker, another guy from the original trilogy generation, who's a fan, asked me, so where in the timeline does this movie fit exactly? Oh, and I forgot to mention, he saw the movie last night. He walked out confused about just where it took place. I told him that it took place just before A New Hope. I explained that this movie was the tale that was told in the opening scroll of Episode 4. He said, I thought maybe these were the spies they were talking about in Return of the Jedi. Insert Bothan joke here. He said he also wasn't sure if it was the same Death Star from Episode 4 or a brand new one. He said, heck, we've already seen 3 Death Stars, if you count Starkiller Base, so it's quite possible it could have been a 4th one in his mind. After that, we sat down and talked, and I pointed out all the connective tissue between this film and the others. That Tarkin in this movie was the same bad guy from Episode 4, that the ship at the end of this movie was the same ship we see at the beginning of A New Hope, and I mentioned that line about Obi-Wan Kenobi. Well, all of that had gone over his head. But then he said, hey, you know what? Now that you've explained it, it actually makes the film a little bit better. And then he said he was going to go back and see it again. When we ended the conversation, he said this: why didn't they just explain all of this at the beginning of the movie with a write-up? Meaning the scroll. I've started to wonder that myself. Maybe by trying to separate Rogue One from the other episode films, maybe they went a little too far. Okay, so this is just one conversation with one guy. And it brings me back to my previous thoughts. Did the Lucasfilm marketing department do enough to explain what this movie was to the average guy on the street? And then it makes me wonder now, did the movie itself do enough to explain itself to the average moviegoer who isn't a hardcore Star Wars fan? But then, that leads me to my next question, which is, does the film need to explain itself? But that's a big question, and I'm just about out of time, so I'll leave that for you to ponder. Hey, before we go, a little housekeeping. Just want to remind you that January 11th is the last day to enter my end of the year merchandise giveaway, so just leave a review on iTunes and or Stitcher. It gets your name in the hat, and we'll have a random drawing for some great Star Wars prizes. Check out the website for more details. Another thing, just putting it out there, that Alan Voivod from Star Wars 7x7 and myself will be bringing back our old show, The Expanded Comic Verse. We're going to sit down and record this weekend, so if you like Star Wars comics and you like us, listen to us babble for an hour about comic books. And finally, if you haven't seen it yet, I've started a new project called the Star Wars Podcast Master List at StarWarsPodcastMasterList.com. It's my goal to list every active Star Wars podcast out there today. So far, there's 11 shows on the list and about 100 more to go. Wish me luck. Anyway, that's it. That's all for today. Tell me what you think. Email me at 12parsekspodcast@gmail.com or check out all my social media links on 12parsekspodcast.com. Thanks for listening. Utini!
You've been listening to Less Than 12 Parsecs, the fastest Star Wars podcast in the galaxy, part of the expanded Fandomverse network of shows. For links and show notes, visit our website, 12parsekspodcast.com. Follow Less Than 12 Parsecs on Twitter at 12parpod, on Instagram at 12parsekspodcast, on Tumblr at 12parsekspodcast, and find us on Facebook as well. And please let us know what you think. Email us at 12parsekspodcast@gmail.com.